Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare.
Be sure to subscribe to our channel. We publish new videos every day. Don't forget, grab your smartphone and download the Lava Matra app and stay in touch. Guru Maharaj's message is your advantage. The following is a reading from the new Sri Krishna Chaitanya book by His Holiness Jayapataka Swami Maharaj on May 28th, 2020 in Sri Mayapur, India.
Chalam Pangulang Gayate Garim Yat Kipata Mahan Vande Sri Gurum Dinatarinam Paramahanandamalavam Sri Chaitanya Islam Hare Om Tat Sat.
Chapter name today is Happy Tumult of the Residents of Nadia upon seeing the dancing of Mahaprabhu.
So, reading the description of the procession of the residents of Navadvip.
So we are reading the description of the procession of the residents of Navadvip
In 4 different groups,
in 4 different groups,
of which Lord Chaitanya is in the last group.
of which Lord Chaitanya is in the last group.
They are marching on the house of the Chandkasi,
They are marching on the house of the Chand Kazi
doing kirtan and dancing.
and doing kirtan and dancing.
Now when all the people of Navadvip came out to see the dancing of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu,
When all the people of Navadvip came out to see the dancing of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu,
for so long they wanted to see his kirtan and dancing.
for so long they wanted to see his kirtan and dancing.
Now everyone was seeing.
Now everyone was seeing.
They became very ecstatic.
They became very ecstatic.
So now we hear the description.
Now we can hear the description.
হেন বুঝি বৈকুণ্ঠ আইলা নবদ্বীপে বৈকুণ্ঠ স্বভাব ধর্ম পাইলে লোকে.
So if we understood, Vaikuntha had descended as Navadvip. It was understood
It was understood that Vaikuntha had descended in Navadvip,
that all the inhabitants of Navadvip
and that all the inhabitants of Navadvip
took on the characteristics found in Vaikuntha.
took on the characteristics found in Vaikuntha.
জীব মাত্র চতুর্ভুজ হইল সকল না জানিল কেহ কৃষ্ণ আনন্দে বিহল.
All the living entities took on the form of having 4 arms.
All of the living entities took on the form of having 4 arms,
As they do in Vaikuntha.
like they do in Vaikuntha.
But no one understood this.
But no one understood this.
Being overwhelmed in ecstatic love for Krishna.
Being overwhelmed in ecstatic love for Krishna.
হস্ত যে হইল চারি তাহে নাহি জানে আপনার স্মৃতি গেল তবে তালি কেনে.
And they didn't notice that they had manifested 4 hands,
They didn't notice that they manifested 4 hands,
4 arms.
4 arms.
They forgot of themselves.
They forgot of themselves.
How did they clap their hands?
So how did they clap their hands?
হেনমতে বৈকুণ্ঠের সুখে নবদ্বীপ নাচিয়া যায়েন সবে গঙ্গার সমীপ।
In this way, the inhabitants of Navadvip
In this way, the inhabitants of Navadvip
enjoyed the happiness of Vaikuntha.
enjoyed the happiness of Vaikuntha.
They were dancing along the path
As they were dancing along the path
near the Ganges.
near the Ganges.
বিজয় করিলা যেন নন্দ ঘোষের বালা, হাতেতে মোহনবাসী গলে বনমালা।
It appeared that the son of Nanda Ghosh,
It appeared that the son of Nanda Ghosh,
Nanda Maharaj,
Nanda Maharaj,
had descended,
chanting
flute in his hand,
with an enchanting flute in his hand,
with a beautiful flower garland around his neck.
with a beautiful forest flower garland around his neck.
এই মতো কীর্তন করিয়া সর্বলোক পাশরিলা দেহ ধর্ম যত দুঃখ শোক।
In this way, all the people performed kirtan.
In this way, all the people performed kirtan.
Everyone forgot their bodily situation,
Everyone forgot their bodily situation,
such as distress and lamentation.
such as distress and lamentation.
So the devotees of Navadvip participating in this Sankirtan of Lord Chaitanya,
So the devotees of Navadvip participating in this Sankirtan of Lord Chaitanya,
they became the residents of the spiritual world.
they became like residents of the spiritual world.
They were filled with spiritual ecstasy,
They were filled with spiritual ecstasy,
of love of Krishna,
of love of Krishna,
and they manifesting spiritual bodies.
and they were manifesting spiritual bodies.
They are not aware of this situation
They were not aware of this situation
because they are so much overwhelmed in ecstasy.
because they were so much overwhelmed in ecstasy.
গড়াগড়ি যাই কেহ মাল সাটু পুরে, কাহারো জিহবায় নানা মদ বাক্য স্ফুরে।
Some people rolled on the ground,
Some people rolled on the ground,
and some slapped their limbs.
and some slapped their limbs.
Some were speaking different languages
And some were speaking different languages,
and manifested on their tongues.
which manifested on their tongues.
We have heard of people speaking in tongues,
So we have heard of people speaking in tongues,
speaking different languages that they don't normally know.
speaking different languages that they normally know,
Don't know.
speaking languages that they normally don't know.
And so this apparently was a part of the unusual special manifestation of the Kirtan in Navadvip. This was part of the Kirtan manifestation
This was part of the Kirtan manifestation
in Navadvip.
in Navadvip.
Some people were so ecstatic they're rolling on the ground.
Some people were so ecstatic they were rolling on the ground.
Some people started slapping their body like professional wrestlers.
Some people started slapping their body like professional wrestlers.
I mean, there's so much jubilation.
There was so much jubilation.
Some people were speaking in languages that they don't know.
Some people were speaking in languages that they don't know.
had 4 hands.
They had 4 hands.
Didn't notice.
They didn't notice.
It's completely out of this world's manifestation.
It was completely out of this world's manifestation.
কেহ বলে এবে কাজী বেটা গেল কোথা লাগিয়ে পাও এখন ছিন্ডিয়া ফেলো মাথা
Someone said, "Where is that Kazi fellow?"
Someone
Now-
said, "Where is that Qazi fellow now?"
If we find him, we'll tear off his head.
If we find him, we will tear off his head.
রর দিয়া যাই কেহ পাষণ্ডী ধরিতে কেহ পাষণ্ডীর নামে কিলায় মাটিতে
Some people ran to catch some atheists.
Some people ran to catch some atheists,
And others punched the ground,
and others punched the ground
uttering the name of the atheist.
while uttering the name of an atheist.
না জানি বা কতজনে মৃদঙ্গ বাজায় জানি মহানন্দে কতজনে গায়
Who can say how many people played on mridangos?
Who can say how many people played on mridangas?
Who can say how many people sang in great ecstasy?
Who can say how many people sang in great ecstasy?
হেন প্রেম বৃষ্টি হইল সর্বনদিয়ায় বৈকুণ্ঠে সেবক যাহা চাহে সর্বথায়
Ha ha! There's such a rain, downpour of rain
There was such a downpour of rain
in the form of ecstatic love of Krishna
in the form of ecstatic love of Krishna
all over Nadia.
all over Nadia.
And even the inhabitants of Vaikuntha
That even the inhabitants of Vaikuntha
hankered on to experience it.
That even the inhabitants of Vaikuntha hankered to experience it.
যে সুখে বিহলা জনন্ত শঙ্কর হেন রসে ভাসে সর্বনদিয়া নগর
That transcendental happiness which overwhelms
That transcendental happiness which overwhelms
Lord Brahma, Anantadeva, and Lord Shankar.
Lord Brahma, Anantadeva, and Lord Shankar.
The entire Navadip city was floating in that transcendental ecstasy.
The entire Navadvip city was floating in that transcendental ecstasy.
গঙ্গা তীরে তীরে প্রভু বৈকুণ্ঠে রায় সাঙ্গ পাঙ্গ অস্ত্র পারিষদে নাচি যায়
Alongside the bank of the Ganges,
Alongside the bank of the Ganges,
the Lord of Vaikuntha,
the Lord of Vaikuntha,
he danced with his expansions,
he danced along with his expansions,
his servants,
his servants,
weapons,
his weapons,
and confidential companions.
and confidential companions.
কীর্তন প্রভাবে সকল স্থানের পবিত্রতা পৃথিবীর আনন্দের নাহি সমুচ্চয় আনন্দে হইলা সর্বদিক পথময়
The earth had never experienced have witnessed such and have never experienced such ecstasy.
The earth had never experienced such ecstasy.
The roads in all directions were filled with loving ecstasy.
The roads in all directions were filled with loving ecstasy.
তিলমাত্র অনাচার হেন ভূমি নাই পরম উত্তম হইল সর্বঠাই ঠাই।
There was not the slightest misbehavior
There was not the slightest misbehavior
to be found anywhere. Each of those places became supremely purified.
Each of those places became supremely purified. All of those places became most sanctified by the influence of Hari Kirtana. Even ordinary places no longer remained like desolate abodes of sense gratification devoid of kirtan.
শ্রী চৈতন্যের আদি কীর্তনের পদ। নাচিয়া যায়েন প্রভু গৌরাঙ্গ সুন্দর বেরিয়া গায়েন চতুর্দিকে অনুচর।
Lord Gauranga Sundar danced along the way.
As Lord Gauranga Sundar danced along the way,
His followers on all sides of him were singing.
his followers on all sides of him were singing.
অথপদ তুয়া চরণে মন লাগো হুরে সারঙ্গ ধর তুয়া চরণে মন লাগো হুরে।
Let my mind be fixed at your lotus feet,
Let my mind be fixed at your lotus feet,
O carrier of the bow.
O carrier of the bow.
Let my mind be fixed at your lotus feet.
Let my mind be fixed at your lotus feet.
চৈতন্য চন্দ্রে আদি সংকীর্তন ভক্তগণ গায় নাচে শ্রী সচিনন্দন।
Our Lord Chaitanya Chandra's original Sankirtan.
As Lord Chaitanya Chandra's original Sankirtan,
All the devotees were chanting
all the devotees were chanting
Sri Sachinandan
and Sri Sachinandan
was dancing.
was dancing.
So, in this description of the carrier of the bow,
So in this description of the carrier of the bow,
some considered Lord Sri Ramchandra
some considered Lord Sri Ramachandra
as the carrier of the bow
as the carrier of the bow
and wanted to fix their mind on his lotus feet.
and wanted to fix their mind on his lotus feet.
Some considered Krishna or Vasudev
Some considered Krishna or Vasudev
wanted to fix their mind on his feet,
and wanted to fix their mind on his feet,
lotus feet.
on his lotus feet.
And some were devotees of Lakshmi Narayana.
And some were devotees of Lakshmi Narayan.
Some people wanted to worship Sitaram.
And some people wanted to worship Sita Ram.
So different devotees may manifest their devotion on different levels.
So different devotees may manifest their devotion in different levels.
In whatever case, the devotees are detached from sinful activities.
In whatever case, the devotees are detached from sinful activities.
They're eager to benefit themselves and others.
They are eager to benefit themselves and others.
So the Supreme Personality of Godhead
So the Supreme Personality of Godhead,
His pastimes, His abode,
His pastimes, His abode,
His devotees
His devotees
are free of all material limitations,
are free of all material limitations,
like abomination,
like abomination,
incompleteness,
incompleteness,
insipidness,
insipidness,
limitation,
limitation,
temporariness.
and temporariness.
Nothing in devotional service is temporary.
Nothing in devotional service is temporary.
It remains eternally.
It remains eternally.
So, people think of devotional service in some material sense.
So if people think of devotional service in some material sense,
They distort the essential characteristics of eternal devotional service.
they distort the essential characteristics of eternal devotional service.
কীর্তনাবেশে সকলের পথভ্রান্তি ও চতুর্দশ ভুবনের শব্দষ্ঠ বিষয় অতিক্রমণ। কীর্তন করেন সবে ঠাকুরের সনে, কোন দিকে যাই হা কেহ নাই জানে।
So absorbed in doing the kirtan with the Lord,
They were so absorbed in doing kirtan with the Lord Gauranga.
they forgot what direction they should go,
They forgot what direction they should go,
and where they were going they didn't know.
and where they were going they didn't know.
So they forgot where they were going.
They forgot where they were going.
লক্ষ কোটি লোকে যে করয়ে হরিধ্বনি, ব্রহ্মাণ্ড ভেদয়ে জানো হেন মতে শুনি।
Hundreds of thousands, millions of people were chanting the holy names of Hari.
Hundreds and thousands and millions of people were chanting the name of Hari.
The vibration was so powerful
The vibration was so powerful
that it penetrated the universe.
that it penetrated the universe,
ব্রহ্ম
People could hear it all over the universe.
and people could hear it all over the universe.
ব্রহ্মলোক শিবলোক বৈকুণ্ঠ পর্যন্ত, কৃষ্ণ সুখে পূর্ণ হইলা নাহি তার অন্ত।
The planet of Lord Brahma, planets of Lord Shiva,
The planets of Lord Brahma,
planet of Lord Brahma,
the planet of Lord Brahma,
the planet of Lord Shiva,
the planet of Lord Shiva,
even Vaikuntha
and even Vaikuntha
became filled with the unlimited happiness
became filled with the unlimited happiness
of Krishna consciousness.
of Krishna consciousness.
There was no limit.
There was no limit. Since the name of Hari was chanted loudly, the vibration penetrated the 14 worlds. Abodes such as Brahmaloka, Shivaloka, and above them, yet beneath Goloka, the supreme opulent Vaikuntha Loka, became filled with the ecstasy of Krishna consciousness. Vibrations of Hari Kirtan penetrates all the 14 worlds, or demigods and human beings dance together in Sankirtan.
দেবগণের কীর্তন দর্শনে মূর্ছা ও সম্বিত প্রাপ্তিতে কীর্তনে যোগদান। স্বপার্শ্বদে সর্বদেব আইল দেখিতে, দেখিয়া মূর্ছিত হইলা সবার সহিতে।
With their associates, the demigods came to see the kirtan.
With their associates, the demigods came to see the kirtan.
When they saw the kirtan,
When they saw the kirtan,
they all fainted.
they all fainted.
So extraterrestrial beings
So extraterrestrial beings,
hearing the loud vibration of the Harinam Kirtan,
hearing the loud vibration of the Harinam Kirtan,
which was penetrating all over the universe.
which were penetrating all over the universe.
They came down to see
They came down to see,
along with their associates.
along with their associates.
And then when they saw the Kirtan manifestation,
And then when they saw the Kirtan manifestation,
they fainted,
they fainted,
being overwhelmed with the ecstatic manifestation.
being overwhelmed with the ecstatic manifestation.
Even the celestial angels and devas, demigods,
So even the celestial angels, devas, and demigods,
they came down with their associates to see the Kirtan
they came down with the associates to see the Kirtan
and became overwhelmed
and became
with
overwhelmed
the ecstatic expression
with the ecstatic expression
that was going on.
that was going on.
চৈতন্য পায়াক্ষণে সর্বদেবগণ নররূপে মিশাইয়া করে না কীর্তন।
And the celestial beings and demigods regained their consciousness.
When the celestial beings and demigods regained their consciousness,
They took the form of human beings
they took the form of human beings
and joined the Kirtan,
and joined the Kirtan,
mixing with the crowds.
mixing with the crowds.
অজভব বরুণ কুবের দেবরাজ যম সোম আদি যত দেবের সমান ব্রহ্মসুখ স্বরূপ অপূর্ব দেখি রঙ্গ সবে হইলা নররূপে চৈতন্যের সঙ্গ।
The celestial beings are Lord Brahma,
The celestial beings like Lord Brahma,
Lord Shiva,
Lord Shiva,
Varuna,
Varuna,
Kuvera,
Kuvera,
Indra,
Indra,
the Yamaraj,
Yamaraj,
the moon god,
and the moon god,
others,
and others.
they all joined this Kirtan procession.
They all joined this Kirtan procession.
When they saw the transcendental happiness which is being manifested,
When they saw the transcendental bliss that was being manifested,
they took on the form of human beings
they took on the form of human beings
to have the association of Lord Chaitanya.
to have the association of Lord Chaitanya.
Haribo! Haribo! Read it.
On seeing those wonderful pastimes that manifested spiritual happiness, all the demigods took human forms and attained the most rare association of Sri Chaitanya Deva.
So this Kirtan was a universal affair.
So this Kirtan was a universal affair.
When the demigods and celestial beings
When the demigods and celestial beings
realized that the Supreme Personality Godhead
realized that the Supreme Personality of Godhead
had descended and is doing a mass Kirtan,
had descended
Sankirtan,
and is doing a mass Sankirtan,
they came down and participated,
they came down and participated,
taking on human forms.
taking on human forms.
No one could realize who they were
So no one could realize who they were
and how many millions of people in the city of Navadvip were there
and how many millions of people of the city of Navadvip were there,
because people were joining the party from all parts of the universe.
because people were joining the party from all parts of the universe.
And it was becoming a transcendental affair.
and it was becoming a transcendental affair.
দেবে নরে একত্র হইয়া হরি বলে আকাশ পুরিয়া মহাদ্বীপ জলে
As the celestial residents, the demigods, humans,
As the celestial residents, the demigods, the humans,
are all chanting together
were all chanting together
the holy name of Hari.
the holy name of Hari.
The sky became lit
The sky became lit
from the big torches,
from the big torches,
or the big torches light lit the entire sky.
or the big torches' light lit the entire sky.
কদলীর বৃক্ষ প্রতি দুয়ারে দুয়ারে পূর্ণ ঘট ধান্য দুর্বা দীপাম্র সারে
And every doorway,
At every doorway,
there were decorations of auspicious items,
there were decorations of auspicious items,
like banana trees with the bunches of bananas,
with banana trees with bunches of bananas,
with full water pots,
with the full water pots,
with rice paddy,
with rice paddy,
with durva grass,
with durva grass,
with lamps,
with lamps,
with decoration of mango leaves.
with decorations of mango leaves.
So these were at each doorstep.
So these were at each doorstep.
নবদ্বীপ নগরে তৎকালীন বৈভব নদিয়ার সম্পত্তি বর্ণিতে শক্তিকার অসংখ্য নগর ঘর চত্বর বাজার
Now the town, who has the power to describe its opulences,
The Navadvip town, who has the power to describe its opulences?
the uncountable suburbs, towns,
There were uncountable suburbs, towns,
houses.
houses,
I can't read it.
raised platforms, and markets.
But just as Dwarka is described in the spiritual world,
Just as Dwaraka is described in the spiritual world,
the Navadvip is part of the spiritual world in Svetadvip.
the Navadvip is part of the spiritual world in Shvetadvip.
And that spiritual opulence of Navadvip was manifest.
So that spiritual opulence from Navadvip was manifest,
Everyone could see it.
and everyone could see it.
Hare Krishna.
এক জাতি লোক যাতে অর্বুত অর্বুত ইহা সংখ্যা করিবে কোন বা অবুধ
Each caste of people
Each caste of people
were in the hundreds of millions,
were in the hundreds of millions,
which who would be try to estimate the number.
which fool would be trying to estimate that number?
অবতরিবেন প্রভু জানিয়া বিধাতা সকল একত্র করি থুইলেন তথা
And the Supreme Lord would descend on this place.
The Supreme Lord would descend in this place.
The Creator had arranged everything,
The Creator had arranged everything,
was present there.
was present there.
স্ত্রীয়ে যত জয়কার দিয়া বলে হরি তাহা লক্ষ বৎসরেও বর্ণিতে না পারি।
Even in 100,000 years,
Even in 100,000 years,
I cannot describe the lady's vibration
I cannot describe the lady's vibrations
of auspicious sounds and chanting of the holy name of Hari.
of the auspicious sounds and chanting the holy name of Hari.
Now, it's understandable from this that
So it's understandable from this that
ladies were also participating in the Sankirtan.
ladies were also participating in the Sankirtan.
They are doing Uludwani and making auspicious sounds
They were doing Uludwani and making auspicious sounds
and chanting the holy name of Hari.
and chanting the holy name of Hari.
So amazing was the sound,
So amazing was the sound,
the vibration that the author says in 100,000 years he can't explain.
The author says that even in 100,000 years he cannot explain
The vibration and the ecstasy that spreading around.
the vibration and the ecstasy that was spreading around.
প্রভুর নৃত্য কীর্তনাদি দর্শনে সকলের ধৈর্য বিচ্যুতি। যে সব দেখে প্রভু নাচিয়া যাইতে, তারা আর চিত্তবৃত্তি না পারে ধরিতে।
Say Lord Gauranga dancing along the pathway.
Seeing Lord Gauranga dancing along the pathway,
They could not control their emotions.
they could not control their emotions.
সে কারুণ্য দেখিতে, সে ক্রন্ধন শুনিতে, পরম লম্ফট পরে কাঁদিয়া ভূমিতে।
Saying that incredible mercy,
Seeing that incredible mercy,
hearing the crying of the Lord in ecstasy,
hearing of the crying of the Lord in ecstasy,
even great debauchees,
even great debauchees,
I fell on the ground crying,
they fell on the ground crying,
weeping.
they fell on the ground weeping.
So such was the ecstasy that was witnessed in the Sankirtan party of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
So such was the ecstasy witnessed in the Sankirtan party of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
Many times we have seen dramas and different things
Many times we have seen dramas and different things
trying to display the ecstasy of Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan.
trying to display the ecstasy of Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan
When they approached the house of the Chandkazi.
when they approach the house of the Chandkazi.
But here we see in this description
But here we see in this description
unlimited ecstasy.
there was unlimited ecstasy.
Denizens of different planets in the universe
The denizens of different planets of the universe
are coming down and mixing with the people,
were coming down and mixing with the people,
participating in this kirtan.
participating in this kirtan.
And even the most sinful people, most materialistic debauchees,
And even the most sinful people, the most materialistic debauchees,
and they could experience the ecstasy of this Sankirtan.
even they could experience the ecstasy of this Sankirtan.
They fell to the ground weeping.
They fell to the ground weeping.
So we are so fortunate that we have a chance to participate in a minute way in the Sankirtan movement of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
So we are so fortunate to be able to participate in a minute way in the Sankirtan of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
But how this Sankirtan manifested by Lord Chaitanya
How the Sankirtan manifested by Lord Chaitanya
was so amazing,
was so amazing,
so universal festival.
so universal festival.
That's something to be part of.
That's something to be part of.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thus ends the chapters entitled Happy Tumult of the Residents of Nadia upon seeing the dancing of Mahaprabhu. And the demigods were taking the forms of human beings in these wonderful pastimes to walk around with the devotees in different pastimes.
The devas were dancing.
The devas were dancing.
You can't imagine how the Supreme Lord came down and was dancing with his devotees.
We can't imagine how the Supreme Lord came down and was dancing with his devotees
And inspiring everybody in love of Krishna.
and inspiring everybody with love of Krishna.
Lord Jesus said
Lord Jesus said
his first commandment was to love God. His first commandment,
his first commandment was the love of God.
to love God with all your heart, with all your mind, all your soul.
To love God with all your heart, with all your mind, and with all your soul.
Lord Chaitanya actually gave that love to everyone.
Lord Chaitanya practically gave that love to everyone.
And people were moved in inexplicable ways
And people were moved in inexplicable ways
to participate in the loving service of the Supreme Lord.
to participate in the loving service of the Supreme Lord.
Since the Lord and His name are not different,
Since the Lord and His name are not different,
so chanting the name of the Lord
so chanting the name of the Lord
means that one associates with the Lord.
means that one associates with the Lord.
And that was manifested in this historical Sankirtan procession.
So that was manifest in this historical Sankirtan procession.
Questions?
Questions? Dear Guru Maharaj, please accept my respectful obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. The demigods were taking the forms of human beings in these wonderful pastimes to walk around with the devotees in different pastimes. Is that happening even today? That they take the form of human beings to participate in kirtan, festivals, etc.? Your spiritual daughter, Mallika Madhavi Devidasi.
So Prabhupada said that sometimes Narada Muni comes down and
Srila Prabhupada said that sometimes Narada Muni comes down
watches the kirtan of the devotees.
and watches the kirtan of the devotees.
And Prabhupada was saying how he saw Nitai Gaur dancing in the Rath Yatra.
And Prabhupada was saying how he saw Nitai Gaur dancing in the Rath Yatra.
So Prabhupada could see participation
So Prabhupada could see the participation
of extraterrestrials in the Sankirtan.
of extraterrestrials in the Sankirtan.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Dear Gurudev, please accept my respectful obeisances. All glory to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you for your blessings. What is the meaning of love of Krishna? Thanks. Your servant Divya Govinda Das.
In the material world, we love different things.
In the material world, we love different things.
Some people love ice cream.
Some people love ice cream.
Some people love movies.
Some people love movies.
What is real love?
But what is real love?
Actually, we're part of Krishna.
Actually, we are part of Krishna.
So it's natural for us to love Krishna.
So it's natural for us to love Krishna.
And we love various parts of Krishna.
And we love various parts of Krishna.
That's insignificant.
But that is insignificant.
Actually love Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Actually love Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Means that you want to serve Him
Means that you want to serve Him.
and that you're completely absorbed in His transcendental form, qualities,
and that
pastimes.
you're completely absorbed in His transcendental form, qualities, and pastimes.
But I don't think it can be explained so simply
But I don't think it can be explained so simply
in a few words.
in a few words.
But we can see how the devotees of Lord Chaitanya
But we can see how the devotees of Lord Chaitanya
and how Lord Chaitanya himself
and how Lord Chaitanya himself
manifested love of Krishna.
manifested love of Krishna.
And they say, picture is worth 1,000 words,
They say that a picture is worth 1,000 words,
and the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya
and the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya
are more than 1,000 pictures.
are more than 1,000 pictures.
Do you like our ad-free videos? Be sure to subscribe to our channel. We publish new videos every day, and don't forget to like and share our channel.